Welcome to the final lesson of the module, where we'll look at the big picture of programming to achieve and sustain body composition goals, and then we will wrap up the entire module in a summary. So let's get started. Okay, so this is the big picture of programming. And we have essentially three parts: individualizing the training program, individualizing the diet, including the carb prescriptions. We've been talking about carbs so much during this module. And then individualizing the approach to tracking and accountability. So we have to take into account personal preference, tolerance, and goal. When you base your programming variables on personal preference, then you set the individual up for long-term adherence. So even with things as basic as diet and exercise, you have to structure the diet so that it's based on the individual's preferred foods that the person likes, foods that the person even loves. And with exercise and physical activity, exercise selection, the mode of physical activity, the mode of exercise has to be based on their personal preference. Some people will love just the standard gym type of environment, while others will like, things that are entirely different than the standard gym environment. Some people will like the outdoors more. Some people will like different types of gyms. Some people will like different types of physical activity, whether it's more aerobically oriented or more resistance oriented. And so you have to find personal preference in that regard, just as you would with personal preference about diet prescription. And speaking of personal preference and diet prescription, you have to individualize not just food selection, but also macronutrition. Not everybody has a preference for low carb, high fat, or for high carb, low fat. There's going to be a spectrum of preferences and everything in between those two ends. And so the way to optimize and the way that you can set yourself up to make stepwise adjustments and also hedge against quickly running into plateaus is to prescribe the maximal amount of calories that will still allow forward movement towards the goal. So if the goal is weight loss or fat loss, then the objective would be to recommend or prescribe the maximum amount of calories that will still allow fat loss progress. And you can do the same thing with carbohydrate. Issue the maximum amount of carbohydrate within that umbrella of the maximum amount of calories that will still allow the person to, for example, lose 0.5% to a full percent of their body weight per week. And the rationale behind doing that is that if you start off lowballing these things, if you lowball carbs right off the bat, or you lowball calories right off the bat, then the person will fatigue faster, both physiologically and psychologically. And when you run into a plateau that's driven by diet fatigue and a lack of compliance, consistency, or just a combination of those things, then where do you go once you hit that plateau, but you're already lowballing the client? So if you maximize calories, then maximize calories that'll still allow progress. When you run into a bona fide progress plateau where you reach an equilibrium point, then you have more options. You have more options to actually decrease calories to break through plateaus in order to move forward with weight loss or fat loss. So that's the rationale behind initially issuing the maximal amount of calories that'll still allow progress. And it is different on the physical activity / energy expenditure / training side of things. So it can be a really cool tactical maneuver to find out what is the minimum effective dose of training that will still allow satisfactory progress. because when you find out what's that minimum effective dose, then when your client runs into progress plateaus, then you have options in front of you. You have the option available to increase training variables, whether it's duration or intensity or frequency through the week. So, and this tactic would be the opposite of what you don't want to do, which is to hit them with the maximal amount of training that they can possibly tolerate. Because then when you start running into plateaus, you have nowhere to go from there. And once again, that applies to the eating side of things too. You don't want to lowball calories to the point where you're finding out what's the minimum amount of calories that they can possibly just tolerate and stay conscious. So you can do these sort of manipulations so you can set yourself up better for adjustments as you run into plateaus. And when you optimize in this manner, then you can foster better adherence in the long term. And it is all about individualization. So this was kind of a big picture presentation. There's very little specific details going on here. We're going to cover in the following module, we're going to talk about programming for fat loss. So the dietary side of things. I know I mentioned exercise here, but I'm mentioning it because it's one of the components. But we are going to go into the specific programming details diet-wise for fat loss in the next module. So let's summarize this module. Defining obesity is challenging. BMI stratification is problematic for individuals, but can be a rough screening tool for populations. Obesity is multifactorial. The road to the gate metaphor goes like this. So the gate itself to weight loss is a net caloric deficit sustained over a substantial period of time. That's the gate. So the road to the gate, the road to the caloric deficit, is influenced by a multitude of factors. So the reason why I painted that metaphor is because a lot of people will claim that weight loss is not about calories because look at all these other factors involved. Well, you know what? All of those factors are involved, but ultimately they're just influencing vectors en route to get to the gate, and the gate is a caloric deficit. Many roads to the gate. Appetite regulation is a complex interplay of physiological, psychological, and social/environmental factors. Appetite regulation is a complex topic. And if you made it through that module without, dozing off or eyes glazing over, then I highly commend you. The competing theories of obesity do not have the same degree of veracity in terms of the human research evidence. The energy balance model wins the evidence war over the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. And this isn't to say that I'm anti-carb restriction. I am pro-personal preference. So if you have a personal preference for carb restriction and you do better on it and you feel better on it and you can stick to it long term, then hallelujah, that's what you should be doing. But just don't kid yourself into thinking it isn't about calories and that it's just about carb restriction. Because in a lot of cases, as we saw, carb restricted diets end up defaulting to higher protein, and it is actually the protein that ends up doing the in quotes magic. Body composition outcomes of overfeeding vary widely according to the starting status of the individual, the presence versus absence of training, and the macronutrient composition of the diet. The big picture of programming involves individualization according to personal preference, tolerance, and goal. And with that, we will see you on the following module.